Okay, so this is episode 1 of Chicken Noodle Soup for the Adult Soul podcast. Now, this is going to be my first podcast and probably my most important podcast because I want to talk about something that I've wanted to talk about for a really long time. And that, my friends, all you newcomers, everybody, we're all welcome here, right? It's understanding neurodivergent people and neurodivergence in general. Cue the music. Now, I'm gonna be honest, when I was a kid, I daydreamed a lot in class. We all have before. We all have very active imaginations. When you are a kid, you do tend to daydream a lot. And I mainly did it because my distraction. Like, I was easily distracted. And I didn't like my reality of me being stuck in a class 6 hours a day. I had nowhere else to go. You have to go to school when you're a kid. It's the law. When I'm physically in school, mentally, I would be in other places, just thinking about anything. I will be thinking about being famous or actually having the boy that I like talk to me, being a famous producer, or literally just living life like I want to be a Smurf. But of course, my teacher, she didn't like that. She always snapped her fingers. Like, please get out of your daydream. Anytime I would wake up, my ass would wake up, the kids would just be laughing at me. And when you are a kid who has autism or ADHD or you're on the spectrum, socializing can be very difficult. When people drop social cues or they say something in a sarcastic tone, or they would say or do things that you are expected to pick up on and is considered to be the norm, you may not quite exactly understand what they're doing because the way you behave and the way you interact with others is not the same as how they would interact with you. But the thing is, a lot of people don't understand that. They will not get that. And a lot of times they don't want to get that because the thing is, when you are neurodivergent, you're living in a world where you are expected to understand neurotypicals, but the neurotypicals don't want to understand you. So feels like mentally there's some type of imbalance. The world is very ableist. The amount of bullying that a lot of people, even myself as a child, what I went through. And I'm going to try not to get too emotional because I get pretty emotional when I talk about this because this was a huge thing that I've dealt with as a kid. The fact that you can be a very smart kid, but if you act in a way that others may not understand because your brain just so happens to be different, you are subjugated to a lot of harassment. And I remember growing up, my intelligence was always constantly insulted. I was called stupid, dumb, the R word. We all know what that word is. I'm not trying to get this video taken down. But you see what I mean. And a lot of us did not have that many friends growing up. Neither did I. I didn't remember getting my first friend till I was I was in the second grade. I met this girl, this other black girl. She was really nice, but she was just a little bit of something. She wasn't that much of a strong. I remember I got my real first friend, though, in the third grade. Her name is Robin. I don't think she's watching this, but we still know each other. Love you, Robin. And growing up, friends, they come and go. And when you are a child with neurodivergence, not only is making friends difficult, maintaining friends is difficult because a lot of them will drop you like a hat. disappear on you because you don't fit that image. You're seen as the weird kid. But due to us being constantly socially rejected, a lot of us develop disorders where we become sensitive to rejection. And I believe it's called rejection sensitivity disorder. I kind of have that myself. It's a really not much talked about part of ADHD and as well as autism, but it's not a good thing to experience. And it's not just, whoa, I like the guy or I like the girl and they didn't want anything to do with me. It could be something like that, but it's also where you feel the need to become a people pleaser. Because you feel the need to constantly shove yourself inside certain boxes, or in a way shrink yourself to constantly gain approval of others. Because when you carry yourself in a certain way, a lot of us grow up being told, oh, you're weird, you're stupid, you're off, you're not normal, you're this and this and that. It causes you to become sensitive to people having even slight disapproval or slight criticisms of yourself or things that means dearly to you. And that's honestly a whole different conversation for a whole different day. That disorder can have a whole podcast within itself and have a whole different video within itself. But this is just scraping the iceberg of the mentality that a lot of people on the spectrum deal with. Now, for this episode, I want to talk about my own personal experience as a neurodivergent person. Now, growing up, I always had focus problems. My grandma used to do this thing where she would buy vitamin water and she would tell me to just drink vitamin water because she thought that it would brighten my focus. And at one point, I was even took to the doctor. I was like 6 years old, and my mom took me to the doctor and to have my brain, not my brain, or to run some type of test. I don't exactly remember what happened at the doctor. This happened like 15 years ago. I went to the doctor and they ran tests on me to see if I have any actual problems when it comes to my focusing. And they said I do have focus problems. I wasn't given a diagnosis though. I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD and depression until I was 14. They told me, yeah, your daughter has focus problems. We don't exactly know what it is or what's causing it, but we believe her focus would get better as she gets older, like 80 years old. And I was just thinking to myself, I gotta wait till I'm 80 years old till my focusing gets better. And I'm like 6 years old and I'm just sitting here sipping on my vitamin water. And my mom and my grandma are like, yeah, that's what the doctor said. And I'm just like, wow. So, but when I was diagnosed, everything kind of fell into place. Like everything started making sense. Like, oh, it made sense why I struggled so much academically, why I was making nothing but C's on my report card. I can barely get a B, if that. I didn't start making B's until I was in like middle school. Or, oh, it makes sense why I didn't have that many friends growing up and why kids always thought I was weird and they poked fun at me because I socialized a tad bit differently. It all started to fall into place. And I felt like I found answers. But at the same time, when I did found those answers, I grew even sadder. And that's how I started getting depression when I was 14. It's accumulation of things, but that's one of them. But we're going to get into that later on in the episode. Now, I remember when I was a kid, my mom, well, when I was a kid in preschool, my mom would tell me, when you go through school, there's these things called grades. And this was before I hit the first grade. I was like in pre-K kindergarten. She told me, okay, so school is like levels. She would say the first grade, the second grade, the third grade, the fourth grade. And she was like pointing her fingers up at the sky and was like just pointing more and more into the sky, just reaching to the top. And when she pointed her finger at the very top, she was like, this is the 12th grade. And after you're done with the 12th grade, you'll get your high school degree. And that's what you should be focusing and striving for. And I was like really interested. I was like, I cannot wait till I go into school. Like I genuinely was looking forward to learn, and I was genuinely was willing to build a good relationship with school, with my education. And I was like, I cannot wait till I experience this. But little did I know, I had no idea what school had in store for me. Now I actually remember my very first day of the first grade. I walked into class, I was with a bunch of these other kids, and I had a teacher. I forgot her name. I think her name was Miss Turner. Yeah, her name was Miss Turner. I can't believe I actually remember that. This is like 2007. Yeah, this was the early 2000s. Like I'm like in my early 20s right now. But yeah, Miss Turner was a great teacher. I remember we learned about the weather that day, and then they gave us this book called Learning is Fun. And then we started coloring in the book, and we're supposed to write about things that we liked about school, even though this is like the first day of school and we had no experience with school. We still somehow had to find a way to talk about things that we liked about school, even though we've never really been in school. Okay, makes no sense, right? But I liked my first day, but that was just the first few days. Like the first few days of the first grade was great. Amazing, wonderful, right? But things started to change a little bit when I was entering later on into the grade. I was noticing I started making C's on pretty much everything. I would be barely passing. And then on the other hand, we had this girl named Emily who would be crying over making an 89 on something. She would be crying over making a good grade and not making an A. And I'll be thinking to myself, girl, I'd be happy to make an A. I'd be happy to make a B. I'd be happy to make anything besides barely passing. In fact, I was just happy that I at least passed the assignment, the quiz, the anything. But then it felt weird to me that I felt like I wasn't succeeding. I felt like I was an underachiever. And then my classmates would be crying over being amazing, great students academically. And I'm just like, what? Like, am I missing something here? And then that's when I started getting parent teacher conference calls. Like my teachers would be calling my mom and be like, hey, your daughter is struggling in school again. I think we need to set up a parent teacher conference. My mom would be like, yeah, we all have, and I dealt with this literally every single grade throughout elementary school. From first to fifth grade, I dealt with parent teacher conferences and they were all related to my grades. They would be like, yeah, your daughter is a very, very sweet child. She pays it. Well, she doesn't pay attention in class. Well, but she's a nice, well behaved kid. She's very sweet. She doesn't cause much of a racket, but we are kind of worried for her academically. And I think we should do something, and I, as a teacher, should do something to step in to make sure that she is succeeding in school. And we're going to do whatever we can to take to make sure your daughter succeeds. And the funny thing is, after we had that conference, everything will go back to how the way it used to be, where they would pretty much not do anything and I will continue failing. And there's nothing that happens, nothing changed. Like there's nothing that was gained from that parent teacher conference. It's like they say they want to incorporate other ways of learning without actually incorporating it, because the most they can do was just regular tutoring. And yeah, I got kind of sick of it. And the regular tutoring just felt like a repeat of how the way they teach in their class. So not only was I confused about how the way they was teaching me, I was even more confused when they tutored me because they were just repeating the exact same thing they did in actual class. So I feel like I didn't gain much of anything from tutoring as well. So what else there was left for me? And I remember my grandma, well, not my grandma, my grandma did step in at one point, but before my grandma, I had a really good teacher that stepped in and offered me extra help personally, because we couldn't do no regular tutoring, because the tutoring they offered was we all sat in a class and there'll be me and just a few other kids. It just felt like regular class, but just less students. And then they will just teach us on the board. And I felt like it wasn't up close and personal. They wasn't doing anything hands-on or anything visually, like, because a lot of the way they teach is just them expecting you to hear and understand. And yet again, not everybody is going to understand you just telling them. Like, you have to do more than just tell them and expect them to actually retain that information. You have to find other ways in learning. And yet again, that doesn't mean that the kid is dumb. Like these kids like me were very smart. And for a while, I didn't think I was smart. These kids are very smart. It's just the way that you're teaching them does not help them. It doesn't help them. And not everybody learns the same way, but that's the problem with the education system. They expect one cookie cutter type of learning to work for all kids. And then it leaves out kids with certain disabilities, or kids who may be on the spectrum, who may not learn the typical way where you just sit in the desk and then you listen for an hour and then you raise your hand when you have a question. Like, no, not it. But my fifth grade teacher was really cool. The way that she tutored me was pretty different, and it actually helped me way more, and she motivated me a lot. Her name is Miss Roten, and no shout outs to her. She likely is not going to watch this, but that's okay. Shout outs to her. But by the time I hit the sixth grade, I moved away out of town, and I moved away into, basically, let's just say I just moved out of the city and I just moved into a suburb. So when I moved into the suburb, I was attending a whole different school, a whole different environment, a whole different community. And that's when stuff got real. Stuff really got real. And at this point, I was like, school, yeah. I just gave up. I stopped trying. I didn't really study for my test. I didn't really do my homework. I didn't really do much of my schoolwork. And every time I did study, because I had no support, I was just going over it because I didn't know how to teach myself this material because I barely picked up and retained the information in class. So how am I expected to educate myself when I'm not even certified in anything? And I was like a 12-year-old, 11-year-old girl. Like I felt lost. And then this is when my beautiful grandmother stepped in. She helped me throughout the 6th and 7th grade. And that was about it. And the way that she taught me, there was issues with how the way she was teaching me and how she felt when she was tutoring me and helping me with my schoolwork. And there was issues that I had on her end, how the way she was going about the way she was teaching me. But I'm just glad I got that support because then my grades started to become slightly better. Instead of getting C's, I started getting B's, and I actually got my first B in a class when I was in middle school. I didn't get a first B. I didn't get my first A till I was in high school. But I didn't get my first B until I was in middle school. So that's how much I felt that I was behind because everything goes by units. Like we may be on the second unit, but I'm still stuck on the first unit because things were not being taught in my pace, and we all learn at the same pace. I was learning at a slower pace. I needed to learn at a more slower pace because it's not like I only have but a few weeks to retain a bunch of information from one unit before we move on to the next unit. Like that's not me. Like I need things to be broken down for me better, more for me to understand. But this was my experience. Like 7th grade had to be the hardest for me personally. And I know 7th grade is a very scary grade for a lot of people. It was a very scary grade for me. Like, you're going through puberty, your body changes, and your peers become very much a-holes. And that's what I dealt with. We all dealt with that. Very universal experience. But that was my 6th and 7th grade. And by the time I hit 8th grade, I failed. I failed 3 classes, I got retained. And the bullying got even worse. Like my intelligence was insulted on the daily. And the thing is, at the time, I was a black kid and I was attending an all-white school. So I feel like there was also some subtle racism there. And it actually reminds me of this person. And this is going to be a very, very important part of this podcast because I feel like it just needs to be said. Somebody has to say it. People do not talk about how race also affects neurodivergence. And I remembered like a few months ago, not that long ago, I was watching these interviews by this black woman. Her name is Casey. She is a black woman who has autism and sociopathic disorder. And she was talking about her experiences being a Black woman with autism and sociopathic disorder. And she was growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we all know that back then times were not really as progressive. People are definitely not going to be as nice to you if you have autism or some type of mental or physical disability. She said that she always tried to relate and be close to her peers, but her peers didn't exactly understand her. She was outcast, she was bullied, she was teased, she was pushed downstairs, she was called racial slurs. And now that I am getting older, the more I get older, the more I know as an adult, the more it's actually dawning on me. Being neurodivergent is difficult. Being Black and neurodivergent is even more difficult. People don't take into consideration how racism and ableism overlaps one another. Because, how do I put this? Black people have the stereotype of being dumb, and neurodivergent people have the stereotype of also being dumb. So when you are a Black person living as both, those stereotypes, those narratives intertwine with one another, they overlap. And when you are a Black person who is neurodivergent, you feel the need to constantly prove your intelligence to the world, no matter how well spoken you are, no matter how many good grades you make in school, no matter how much of a good person or how much of a nice and kind person you are, no matter how you carry yourself, you feel the need to constantly prove that you are not dumb, because people oftentimes still think of you in that way, even if you're not. And if you are a person who is both of these things, your intelligence gets dwindled down even more. You have to constantly feel like you have to be over the top when it comes to proving people of your worth, of how smart you can be, without realizing that there are many different ways to be smart as well. It also did not help that, yet again, like I said, I was a Black kid. I was one of the small group of Black kids in my all-white school. I felt like I was being fed to sharks daily when I was dealing with this. And now that I'm an adult looking back, I'm like, yeah, that felt like there was ableism with a hint of racism in there as well. And that's what I dealt with a lot in middle school. It was mentally just terrible. My mental health went down so bad. And after the 8th grade, I failed. And then the next year, my grandma passed away. And I wanted to get myself pulled out of school, and I was taking online classes. And then I fell into a deep depression. Now, this is the part of the podcast where I start to get a tad bit more personal. This is what I was referring to at the very beginning. I was like mentally in a really dark place. I definitely had no friends. I had nobody to talk to. I was going through depression, and I had no one to come to when I was going through that depression. I felt like I was just raw dogging everything, and it was just terrible. I looked, and I had to be like 14, 15 looking back at it. I was like, there's no way a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old should be that sad, have that many dark thoughts. A lot of people also don't seem to talk about how the school system reinforces ableism as well. Like, the whole idea of gifted kids and special ed kids always felt kind of weird to me. Like, this whole idea. And mind you, a lot of these kids who were deemed to be special ed, or who needed some special type of classes, a lot of these kids had learning disabilities, or they were on the spectrum, and it's not like they need to be separated from their class. They just had different ways of learning and understanding information. But this thing that we see special ed kids as lower and gifted kids as higher, and I'm not saying that kids with learning disabilities or autistic or ADHD kids cannot be gifted kids. Those kids can be gifted as well. But a lot of these kids who we deem as gifted are seen as perfect, who fit into that mold of being a perfect, smart, intelligent, neurotypical child. The idea that we see kids who differentiate from that as lower reinforces the idea that neurotypical children are smart and neurodivergent children, or children with learning disabilities, are dumb. And even a lot of neurotypical people need to learn to get their head out of their butt and realize that their academic achievements does not give themselves an excuse to belittle others who may not be as academically intelligent as they are. But that is what the system teaches kids to have that mindset. But this explains a lot of the bullying, though. Like, even as adults, we grow up and then we go on the internet and we see these comedians, these online comedians, making jokes, poking fun at disabled people. Like, they will make a sketch of them making weird noises or acting how they think disabled people are. And the whole shtick, the whole joke is them mocking disabled people, using them as the butt of the joke. And the idea is just them thinking that disabled people are dumb. And it's not funny. And a lot of those traits and those tropes they use also applies sometimes to neurodivergent people. Even in our language, when we use certain words like dumb, stupid, slow, spaz, the R word, we all know what that word is. I'm yet again not gonna repeat that. I want to keep this channel, I want to keep this video. But when we use these terms, not saying that you are a ableist bigot if you were to use these terms most of the time, but we as people should be more mindful of the language that we use. And even when we use this language, even if we use it in a way where we're just joking or we're trying to be lighthearted, we don't mean any harm, in some ways you are still engaging in ableism when you do sometimes use these terms. Because history of words does hold weight. History holds weight. And when we use certain terms, we should be mindful of how these words can affect the people around us and those who are affected by such terms. And not to say I'm an angel, though. I myself do and sometimes engage in that type of language, but it's just us being more educated on why we use these terms and what these terms really mean and what it was really once used for. Because not only that, these terms are also still terms that are used against neurodivergent and people with certain disabilities. And we should take the history of a word. That's why we all should take the history of certain words into consideration before we use them. But now that I'm an adult, though, I sometimes talk to my mom. And because my mom loves to bring up why 20-ish years old, she likes to look at the past of how the way I was performing in school. She will try to tell me or try to get me to understand why I struggled so much in school. And then she just completely chalks it up to me just not caring. And when I told her, well, Mom, I think I didn't receive the support I didn't think the teaching style didn't accommodate for me. The teaching style does not accommodate for a lot of neurotypical children. So how do you think it's going to accommodate a neurodivergent child like me? And then she gets upset when I say this, and she thinks that I'm just trying to pin the blame or trying to take responsibility off myself, and it makes me feel some type of way. Because yeah, I did not care for a while. I did not care about my grades. I didn't care about learning all this new information because it just wasn't fitting for me, and it kind of just made me give up. But it wasn't because I didn't care. Like, for a while I did care. When I first stepped into school as a little child, I wanted to learn. I was looking forward to learning. I wanted to love school, but school mentally drained me. Like, school does suck the life out of kids, and it definitely sucked the life out of me. And to chalk that up to me just not caring all along, it sucks. She doesn't understand, and it sucks. And that's why I wanted to make this podcast. To say that if you do have a neurodivergent child, if you are a parent and you're listening to this and you have a neurodivergent child, or you have a loved one who's neurodivergent, or you yourself are neurodivergent, and you are listening to this podcast and you made it to the end, I just want to let you know that you should listen to such people. And please, please understand us. Thank you and have a good day.